Tonight, the first American troops killed by enemy fire since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. The White House blaming Iran-backed militants for the deadly drone attack on a U.S. base in Jordan, near the border with Syria. 3 Americans at Tower 22 base were killed and at least 30 were injured when the drone strike made it through the base's air defenses.
Well, Carl, if it's anything like what we've seen, it's a lot of bluster but no action. Look, during the Biden administration, we've seen Iran receive over $80 billion in illicit oil sales, and it's gone up over 400%. I've been leading the charge on the House Financial Services Committee to hold Iran accountable so that it stops these second-tier terrorist groups like Hamas, like the Houthis, from receiving money directly from the Iran Revolutionary Guards Corps, which really funds their operation, including those high-end missile systems and radars that were struck by U.S. and British forces. It's very important that not only do we respond with force here, but that we enforce the sanctions that we already have. In fact, we've got people right here in the United States who are funding the insurance programs for this ghost fleet of Iranian oil tankers going out that the Biden administration could stop today. But if we're not going to address the root of the problem, Iran financing these terrorist groups, we're going to continue to see strikes on U.S. interests in the Gulf of Aden, where I've flown combat operations, as well as in Israel, in Gaza, in West Bank, and certainly in Lebanon, as a direct result of a failure of leadership action to crack down. And as you're pointing out, hundreds of strikes on U.S. forces and interests right there in the Middle East where we've served.
Yeah, Congressman, and I got to get this in here because former UN weapons inspector David Albright recently said something very scary. He said today Iran would need only about a week to produce its first nuclear weapon. It could have enough weapons-grade uranium for 6 weapons in a month, and after 5 months of producing weapons-grade uranium, it could have enough for 12. Is it too late to put the genie back in the bottle at this point? What can be done now to prevent this?
No, strong U.S. leadership has the ability to immediately address this issue. We've got to be able to enforce sanctions. We've got to have a strong military presence, as we've seen most recently from carrier strike groups in the region. But we have to recognize that Iran is the source of the problem, not a secondary effect here. And so if we want to just address the issues in, Hamas and the Houthis, we're not addressing the real source of the problem, and that's making sure the Ayatollah and the folks in Tehran know that they need to stop this immediately, and the United States and our allies are going to hold them accountable in the region.
So let me be very clear at the start of this. The Ayatollah, terrorist groups within the IRGC, and the vile members of Hamas, the United States is never going to falter in our support for Israel or the protection of the homeland. Unless you make an informed decision to stand down, I can guarantee that those members on this panel, both Republican and Democrat, are prepared to assert a maximum pressure campaign of our own. So I want to thank all the witnesses for this committee, and as an Air Force guy, we're going to go A-10 style and really rapid fire these questions. I'll begin here with Mr. Norhan. Working with our chairman, Blaine Luetkemeyer, the head of the National Security Subcommittee, we have written a bill, and I'm proud to lead, the Revoke Iranian Funding Act. This works with members on both sides of the committee to be able to address an effort led also by Senator Tim Scott and the Banking Committee to permanently freeze the $6 billion in Iranian assets. It enhances the transparency to bolster global security interests, and it restricts access to other means of terrorist financing. So, Mr. Nourahan, let's be very clear here. Is Iran selling medicine and other humanitarian aid for terrorist financing?
Yes, it is.
Is Iran falsifying official documents to obtain terrorist financing?
Yes, it has.
Has the Turk-Bank cooperation in facilitated the fraudulent documents to empower Iran proxy forces through financing?
Yes, it has, and there's U.S. government documentation of it.
Is Iran the key provider of weapons and munitions to Hamas today?
Yes, it is, sir.
Is the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, responsible for training and equipping Hezbollah?
Without a doubt.
In the last week alone, Iran is responsible for enabling 14 attacks on U.S. forces in the Middle East. Is there any reason to believe that Iran has not been direct in both training and equipping these attacks?
They are 100% responsible, sir.
Then do you agree that it would be insufficient to simply do what the administration now is doing as pausing the distribution of funds, but that Congress should enact legislation to permanently freeze Iran's access to any of the $6 billion that could go forward if left unchallenged?
I believe it is vital that the Congress work to freeze those funds. I believe your bill and the bill with Senator Scott would absolutely be necessary for that, and thank you for your leadership on it.
I appreciate you saying that. I'm now going to turn to Mr. Goldberg. Does the U.S. have a sanctions enforcement problem with Iran?
We have a sanctions non-enforcement problem with Iran.
In fact, I think you said it very clearly. We have gone from maximized pressure to maximized deference. So I want to be very clear here. The Biden administration, including our friends at the State Department, have obviously turned a blind eye to many of the sanctions violations. I'd like to look beyond. If the State Department's not going to do their job, what ways can Congress incentivize our partners or legal institutions to report on Iranian sanctions violations to hold these bad actors accountable?
Yeah, Congressman, thanks for the question. I think there's legislation on this, and you can expand on it. At this point, the administration is violating the law intentionally, knowingly. You should subpoena documents if possible. Oversight should work with you on that as well. Any communications with the Chinese to give them direction to continue to import at such levels. You cannot go 1 million barrels per day increase like this without it being an intentional, willful policy. So anything you can do to force the administration to show you the targets that they're sitting on at the Treasury Department, which must be pretty tall at this point, from non-enforcement and all their communications with any other parties involved, including the Chinese, would be very important.
So let's talk about the real moneymaker in the room, Mr. Brodsky. Let's talk specifically about illicit Iranian oil sales. Is this the most lucrative source for Iran's current funding source to terrorists?
Yes, it's been $80 billion since 2021.
You talk about a ghost armada, or the use of illicit ships to transfer oil and other petrochemicals. How would we best combat that?
Well, we need to start sanctioning the vessels in that 353 group of vessels that are as part of the Ghost Armada. These vessels can now use ports because they are not sanctioned, and that's a very big problem.
Who is the biggest provider of Iranian oil to other countries? Under what flag do they fly?
Panama.
How many of these ghost ships are directly chartered to Panama? Do we know?
Well, Panama has actually, in the Ghost Armada itself, has flagged 47% of that Ghost Armada.
Going after their insurance providers is probably the key way to stop that. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Iran is flush with oil money since President Biden took office. The Islamic Republic is skirting U.S. sanctions and shipping large amounts of crude to China. Senior correspondent Mike Tobin takes a look tonight.
The ship is one of hundreds ignoring U.S. sanctions, smuggling crude, and funding Iran in what experts call the Dark Fleet, or Ghost Armada. Anywhere from 300 to 560 tankers, usually old, and their ownership is hard to determine. They turn off transponders and hide on the lawless open sea. They shop around for poor countries that will permit them to fly their flag for a fee. Around half of them fly Panama's flag, which is why a bipartisan group of U.S. congressmen is demanding Secretary of State Antony Blinken pressure Panamanian leaders to deflag all vessels actively evading U.S. sanctions by transporting Iranian oil. Iran's exports were held to around 400 to 600,000 barrels a day in 2019. With the help of the Ghost Armada, that number has jumped to an estimated 2.4 million barrels a day.
In the last weeks alone, we have seen attack after attack threatening American forces, including those of our friends still serving in uniform today.